Welcome back to the Caniac Chronicles, folks. I'm your chronicler, Andy. This is episode 20. Oops, sorry. Okay, so a lot has happened since the last episode. I guess a lot of shocking things have happened since the last episode. But Canes trudged forward. They've really picked it up in the last two games. So the things I want to talk about tonight. By the way, it is January 7th, 2026. So Happy New Year, first of all. And actually, if there are any Egyptian Orthodox Christians out there, Merry Christmas, folks. I learned a fun fact this week talking to a coworker of mine, and I have another buddy who I did wish Merry Christmas today. So, fun fact, there's the fun fact of the day. Not Christmas isn't traditionally celebrated on December 25th across the world. Who knew? But anyways, so the things that I want to talk about tonight. Slavin. We're going to start out talking about Jaccob Slavin. Some thoughts I have around the scenario with him and sort of what I think should be provided to him. I'll say it like that. I wanted to say expected, but I think provided is a better term. And then we'll kind of get into the recap of the last four games. About four games have passed since the last episode. So we'll touch and talk a bit about each one, hopefully. And then I'll end it with my take on recent events in a game. So anyway, starting off with Jaccob Slavin. So the Jaccob Slavin situation, I've seen that there's a lot of, I want to say criticism, I want to say confusion around his situation, why we're not seeing him in the lineup, more often. He did make it back for a game, I believe, one or two games maybe three, before having that hit that was given to him against the Florida Panthers, that first Saturday game, in that 3 games, from another world, and he hasn't been seen since. And it was a little bit of a concerning hit. Jaccob Slavin has been hit pretty hard before and has come up looking, less than solid in terms of standing on his feet, I would say. And this one, kind of had definitely an eerie feel, an eerie resemblance a little bit to that hit, a hard hit that he has taken in the past before that has taken him out of a game. So my thoughts around the Slavin situation, the first injury stint that he did, I think I truly do think that was a precautionary thing. I think they were definitely interested in taking their time with Slavin's rehab. I don't specifically know what the injury was, although I think it's pretty safe to say, it's something to do with his knee. I certainly think it was something to do with his leg as a whole unit. But, more specifically, I think it might have been knee related. And that's personally as somebody who never went full on competitive athlete, but was very intense with sports at a younger age. I think today, like, how did I personally never tear an ACL or an MCL or do something to my knee that ended up blowing it out in some capacity? And so now being in my early 30s, I'm just a couple of years older than Slavin. I'm a few years younger than Stahl. And, I feel for those guys. I'm every day that goes by that they get a practice or a game in that their knees are holding up, I'm happy for it. So anyways, I think Slavin was, again, they were just taking their time with that, really letting that fully heal, making sure that was back 100% before they went full throttle with him again. And then after that hit against Florida that kind of sent him to the locker rooms, I think it's more along the lines now. It could potentially be Slavin. It's probably coming from both Slavin, I would say probably Carolina's front office, and maybe even, Bill Guerin and the Team USA front office who are trying to put together a gold medal team for the Olympics this year, next month, just a few weeks. Wow. I guess more than a few weeks, a handful of weeks or so. But I'm sure it's sort of a little bit of all three of those parties and maybe some others that I'm less privy to. But he could just simply, be asking for this relief, asking for this time off. Slavin has played a total of 750 regular season games, and he's got about another 80, 90, maybe 100 playoff games that he's gone through. Maybe not that much, but up there. It's got to be up there. I mean, they play anywhere from about 10 to 20 games in the postseason, and they've been to about 6 or 7 now. So yeah, it's got to be getting up there. I would say probably about 60 or 70 playoff games on top of all those regular season games that he's played. And he's logged a ton of hours. He is notoriously one of the highest time on ice players for the Carolina Hurricanes, game in and game out, whether it's the playoffs or not. And it's because of how good he is on the back end too. So when you factor that in, and when you also factor in some other things like his salary history, so his entry level, he took a max, one of the max term length of contract you can take as an entry level draft pick, which is 3 years. I think he was at the max for pay, which is $750,000, so $750K a year for the first 3 years. After that, he took a pretty cap friendly deal at $5.3 million for 7 years. And now after 10 years of being with Carolina, he has signed, he re-signed last year, and he's entered his first year this year under his new 8-year deal for 6.3. So he only agreed upon an extra $1 million a year, and he signed for an extra year, that 8th year. So you can see he's committed 18 years of his career, which is going to probably be the vast majority, if not its entirety, with Carolina. So in my opinion, and I do think it's a pretty good hunch that he is probably asking for this. If Jaccob Slavin is asking for the rest, if he's asking for the time away from the NHL to really hone in and be ready mentally, physically, etc., for the Olympics, these coming Olympics next month, I could totally see that, and I think that should definitely be respected by the front offices. Given the circumstances around the season, I know the season hasn't been very pretty for everybody, but as the commentators were saying last night, Tripp and Mike, Carolina, despite how bad it has seemed, how bad it has been, and all the adversity that has gone on, and we've really hammered this point here on the podcast, despite everything, they are leading the Eastern Conference standings, as well as their division. So there's nothing to worry about in the sense that, we need him back so that we can make the playoffs. We really need him back so that he will be ready for the playoffs. And on top of that, if the guy is asking for the opportunity to be the same level of readiness and preparedness for the Olympics, again, I think he has more than earned the right and the privilege to ask for that, and also be granted it by the front offices. I'm sure that, like I said, I'm sure Team USA front offices have a little bit to do with it. I think all three parties are kind of in the know here. And it's frustrating from the fans' perspective. It sure is, but it's not the end of the world. And again, Slavin is a player that I think commands the right to be in that situation and asking for that level of flexibility from the organization. So let's get into the last few games that have unfolded. So I was speaking very heavily upon a favored Carolina team going into that game against Montreal, and it was all but one for me. Big, key takeaways. It was a tough night. Canes lost 7-5. you never want to lose the game when you score 5 goals, let alone having a single guy on the ice participate in all 5 of them. And that's Sebastian Aho. That night was a pretty frustrating night, at least specifically for me as a fan. I was in attendance that night. My wife and I were, and we were kind of stuck. This kind of happens relatively often, especially given our seating location. We had 3, 4, maybe 5 guys, I think down from Montreal or maybe some part in Canada, rooting and talking openly pretty much the whole game in favor of the Montreal Canadiens. It is what it is. It's a free country. I've definitely been a Canes fan in other buildings. I've just been a hockey spectator in other buildings and rooted for whomever in the past, and I respect it. But hey, it's frustrating to listen to, and it's more. It's even more frustrating not to have something, in the back pocket, like a hey scoreboard, buddy, anything like that, or hey total control of the game, buddy, or even hey they put him out in the first period and a half. It's 6-0, 6-1. Looks like Montreal's got nothing in the tank. It would have been nice to have seen those guys leave, halfway through the game or early. But unfortunately, it doesn't unfold that way. Canes did manage to get an empty net goal to bring it to within 1, make it 6-5 there, and there was a little bit of a glimmer of a hope. But Montreal quickly on the following shift or. After that 5th goal was scored, they did come back and pot the empty netter, sadly. But again, the problem is not scoring. I think that is the key takeaway from that game. Again, Aho with a 5-point night. That was personally very good and satisfying. He had been getting behind in terms of that pace for the 100 points I'm hoping he scores this season. And that 5-point night, really brought it back for him. I believe that was his second 5-point night, which ties his personal point record for any single game. Not much you can do with that game. Really with any of these games, for as ugly as they are, these players, they just got to move forward. You're on to the next one, you're on to the next one. It's going to be like that in the playoffs. It's got to be like that in the regular season. The next game at home, against, Martin Necas, Brett Burns, and Jack Drury returned to the building. Another game, it would have really been sweet to have, taken from them, especially after the first 2 periods there. We had a pretty cushiony lead. The team looked like everything was going full throttle. It looked like the gang got their groove back, if you will. And McKinnon, I think is pretty viral now, very virally, obliterated his stick against the glass. He's coming back at the end of a tough shift that I believe he spends the entire shift in the defensive end. I believe it was just suffocated in their defensive end, and he didn't really get a good shift in. He ends up having to get off for a shift change, and he blasts his stick, and the play has moved on. And so if you're watching on TV, you can just hear the stick smacking hard. And also some of the mics, catch that he's screaming. I didn't really make anything out, but you could tell someone was pissed. And then the cameras just flashed to Nate McKinnon. And I'm like, oh my God, I think they were at a 2-goal lead at the time. And you got Nate, you're inside Nate Dogg's head. You got this guy twisted over hockey right now with 2 regulation losses up until this point. Wow, it felt like we were in command. And, unfortunately, as the song has been pretty consistently as of late, especially against, those top tier teams, Stanley Cup defenders, both current and recent, they fell apart in the third period there, and Colorado just, brought ownership back to the game, unfortunate. Bussy was in net that night. He had a little bit of a collapse there in the period, unfortunately. But again, you move on to the next game. And they had a quick turnaround. They got on the probably the plane and flew up to New Jersey that night to play New Jersey the following day, and that was just complete ownership of New Jersey. That was kind of a textbook Carolina Hurricanes New Jersey matchup as of late. Full dominance from Carolina. New Jersey made a couple of really good pushes throughout the game, certainly as the game was winding down, but Carolina just did a great job of holding that game down. That was a really well played game by Carolina. And then most recently, last night was, in my opinion, the best game that we have seen Carolina play to date. You got Dallas hobbling into the Lenovo Center that night, being, I think, it would have been 0-2-3. So they were coming into Lenovo with 5 losses, which included 3 overtime losses under their belt. The first of a 6-game road trip, by the way. Credit to my wife for discovering that. And, they really need to start that, just like Carolina in the beginning of the year when they always go on their 6-game West Coast trip. Dallas really needs to start this 6-game East Coast trip off on the right foot. They got to end this losing streak. They got to get a full 2 points. They want to stay competitive in their division. They have the most competitive division in the NHL this season. They could not do it. Carolina completely owned the Dallas Stars last night. It was full-blown. What you saw last night, if you watched the game, that was a full-blown playoff performance from Carolina. That is how I and you should want to see the Hurricanes play if they're still playing at the end of May, in the middle of June. Obviously the weeks before that too, but those are specifically the two most important times of the year, specifically for Carolina to perform this season. At least one of them, right? And Carolina completely owns Dallas 6-3. I must admit, I was a little bit losing my mind because while it was a perfect bookend, I guess, if you will, yin and yang bookend, because I'm losing my mind against the Canadians that night for the team losing, fumbling, basically, completely fumbling the game against Montreal and not walking away with any points, but Aho having 5, to the complete reverse, which is Aho being on the ice for, I believe, 5 goals. I know it was 4. I'm pretty sure he was on the ice for a 5th. And he only walks away with 1 point. And it was done on the first goal of the game. I cannot believe he didn't get another point last night. I'm sitting there after that first period, or after that first point that he scores, and I said out loud, I probably should have never done this. This is my wife's superstition. But I don't have this one, so I said it. I said, man, Aho is going to have a big night tonight. I'm thinking 3 points minimum. And he taunts me by being on the ice for 4 more and not having anything to do with them. So, how funny is that? How karma is that? And then finally, it segues basically perfectly off this final game. But I do want to discuss the Mikko Rantanen treatment that he received last night. I'll say this. I have no qualms over the stance the crowd took. I have no objections. I have no ill will toward the fandom. I respect your right to express your opinions in such a way. However, if I was in the arena that night, I don't think I would have been booing Mikko Rantanen. I certainly wouldn't have participated in the Mikko sucks chant. I probably would have participated in the Logan's better chant, but I maybe will have booed Mikko the first go around, but I wouldn't have participated in it long term for that game. I don't even really think I would have booed him the first time. You can't really slight the guy. An absolute top tier talent in the NHL. A guy who, in my opinion, really deserved to have had a better exit with Colorado than he did. He almost, he's sort of got that Vegas type treatment from the Colorado front office in terms of how his trade unfolded there. Seemed like they didn't even go into negotiations whatsoever for re-signing. And, that I think was a little unfair to him. And he ends up getting dumped in Carolina. He doesn't even get, if he's not getting consulted on a negotiation meeting or whatever, he's certainly not getting consulted on where he could end up in terms of a trade. And, we've talked about it. Tulsky took a swing. Tulsky went for him to see if he could make it work. Rantanen didn't take, and Rantanen had the right to do what he choose what he ended up choosing, which is to not stay in Carolina, not re-sign with Carolina. And Tulsky can't make him do it. It was a risk Tulsky took. It was a risk, that he made, that he willingly participated in, and unfortunately didn't work out in his favor. The risk was unfortunately not worth the reward, depending on how you look at it. Obviously, a lot of Carolina fans think, at least by now, I don't know if it was right off the rip. I don't think for me, it wasn't right off the rip. I was pretty upset with the Stankoven trade. I didn't like how undersized he was. I didn't like that we were going in that direction with the size of player we wanted to acquire. I would have rather gone the other way, but Stankoven has turned into, a pretty good asset for Carolina. Personally, I do think he should and will be split up from Blake come playoffs. You need more size with the two of them. I don't think you can put the two of them on the same line just because they're both more on the undersized category. And in the postseason, I think you need to spread that out. But obviously they're goal scorers, both of them. Stankoven walked Rantanen, right down Main Street last night and blew one by, was it DeSmith by this point? That was another great thing about last night. Ottinger got put on the bench before the halfway mark of the second /game, which was great. You love seeing that. No matter who you're facing, but definitely a goalie like Steve Ottinger, a guy who's been up there in the Vezina conversation, in years past. And certainly he could have a pretty good candidacy this year if he keeps it going. And then Busty has a pretty good game too. He did have that little fluky goal there in the beginning of the first power play for Dallas. He made a really good aggressive save, and unfortunately the puck landed on top of him rather than under him, and the ref took notice of that, let the play run, and he accidentally just ends up freaking out more or less and flinging that puck into his own net, sadly. So it was resting, I guess, on his wrist or somewhere. So unfortunate there, but he holds it down from that point on. Rantanen does end up pushing one through, so lucky for him. But it was just too little too late. Carolina finally manages to hold off the push from a top 3 elite team in the NHL. And it's funny, I ended up, we ended up watching Washington and Dallas tonight, and guess who ended up taking a lot more shots tonight than they did last night against Carolina? Dallas. And they ended up winning 3-1. So, or 4-1, I think. They had the empty netter. So that was, that's going to be it. I think I meant to say it in the beginning of the episode. I'm thinking this one's going to be a shorter one this go around. But I don't think there's been too much, in terms of update. I guess, there is Jarvis. I guess we'll talk about Jarvis. Jarvis is back. It's great to see him back. Immediately starts contributing, back into the offense like he was when he went out, gets a goal and an assist. He also, another good point about Jarvis, I am glad I remembered it. I am glad I remembered that this isn't something we can talk about here. But he seen last night on the breakaway coming down the wing, same wing, left side wing, full steam ahead, and he still is barreling toward that net. with no regard for safety. You love to see that with a guy like him coming back. He was in almost the exact same situation, and he even got knocked off his skates and sent into the net for this play, but he ended up being just fine. But you love seeing a guy going right back into the danger zone that got him hurt in the first place. That is a very good sign for Jarvis. I am glad to see that. Obviously, it's good to see him back on the score sheet there, especially with a multi-point night. And Miller had a great night. Keandre Miller back on the scoring sheet in terms of goals. He nets 2 again. Apparently, this guy can only score in clusters of 2 and with a decent amount of games separating them. But looking to see Miller as the team gets more and more healthy, as players start to step back into their roles and reassume their roles. I'm thinking about Slavin again. That should open up Miller for a lot more offensive opportunity, and we'll see what ends up happening there. But ultimately, after this back-to-back win, we do have Carolina playing tomorrow against Anaheim. We do see them playing the Kraken, which is a game that I will be at on Saturday. And then the remaining 2 games will hit the road, and we'll do a back-to-back at Detroit on Monday night, 12 o'clock, and St. Louis Tuesday night on ESPN Plus the 13th. Probably next week's episode will be coming out later in the week. I will be on work travel, so look for that probably Saturday. You could probably expect it Saturday morning if you are listening. Anyways, nonetheless, folks, do appreciate you listening. If you are listening, actually, I always forget to plug it, but I will just drop a quick plug for the socials. I have the Caniac Chronicles on Instagram. I have the Caniac Chronicles and all the episodes and some shorts from various podcasts on YouTube. The Instagram is mostly shorts from the podcasts, announcements for new episodes, and post-game announcements. I always post a post-game summary of the 3 stars, as well as the score and some of the stats related. And then obviously we're on Spotify too if you are listening there. Anyways, Caniacs, Chroniclers, take care, have a great rest of your day. I'm Andy, and it was great podcasting with you.